nearing the end of our Harry Potter review series as we've arrived at Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. The general gameplay and design are a complete departure from the past 6 games. Gone is the open sandbox Hogwarts to explore, and gone is the analog control for spellcasting. Simply put, the game is now a third-person shooter. EA rationalized this shift in design by claiming that they wanted to appeal to the Potter fans that began the series when they were teens and who are now reaching adulthood. Now, a third-person shooter Potter game is not necessarily a bad idea, but EA's attempts to do so are so half-assed, it ends up turning Deathly Hallows Part 1 into the worst game in the franchise. The story traces around and recreates several scenes from the film, however, most of these recreations end up contradicting on how the scenes played out in the film. For instance, in the film, Harry, Ron, and Hermione travel around for a while with no clue as to where to find the next Horcrux, which eventually leads to Ron leaving the group. In the game, you'll simply walk through one forest, and Ron suddenly wants out. It also doesn't help that this scene contains none of the dramatic tension that was seen in the film. For example, here's the scene from the movie.
Please take the Horcrux. You wouldn't be saying any of this if you hadn't been wearing it all day.
Do you know why I listen to that radio every night, dear? To make sure I don't hear Ginny's name. Or Fred. Or George. Or Mum.
What, you think I'm not listening too? You think I don't know how this feels?
No, you don't know how it feels! Your parents are dead! You have no family!
Stop! Stop!
Let go!
And here's how it plays out in the game.
Take off the locket, please, Ron. You wouldn't be talking like this if you hadn't been wearing it.
Yeah, I would. And so would you if you were honest. Go home then. If you're so unhappy, go home to Mummy. Just leave the Horcrux.
Some moments are recreated alright, like the opening sky battle with the Death Eaters, but cooler moments like the escape from the Ministry of Magic are not nearly as thrilling. And if EA really was trying to appeal to the adult audience, why are so many scenes changed? Like, why is the torture scene with Hermione left out? Why does Bethel the Bagshot transform into Nagini off screen? Why is Charity Burbage inside a sack when Voldemort kills her? And why is there no blood on Dobby after he's been stabbed? All of these moments are now essentially PG, that so much of the dark overtones that these scenes had in the film are lost in their recreation. Story aside, the gameplay is the worst part of Hallows Part 1 by far. Since now the game is a third-person shooter, all of the spells are now fired off by pulling the right trigger, and you can lock on to enemies with the left trigger. At first, firing off Stupefy can be fun, but then you'll want to try out some of the other spells only to find that most of them don't function any different from Stupefy. The other spells are Expelliarmus, Confringo, Confundo, Expulso, Impedimenta, Wingardium Leviosa, and Petrificus Totalis. Confundo can turn enemies into allies, Petrificus Totalis can freeze enemies in place, while Confrindo is used to blow up rock barriers that Harry should quite frankly be able to just jump over. Stupefy, Expelliarmus, Impedimenta, and Expulso all function the same way. The only difference is in how fast they fire. There is no reason to ever use any of the other spells at all. The game does tell you that you should use different spells for different situations, but that's complete bullshit as there are no enemies in the game that can only be damaged by certain spells. I just don't understand why EA can't wrap their head around the fact that spells in the Harry Potter series have different effects. Stupefy stuns, Expelliarmus disarms an opponent, and so on. I mean, they seem to have some idea, as Confringo and Petrificus Totalis seem to work like they're supposed to. If the spells had worked differently from each other, and enemies actually required you to use different spells to bring them down, then the spellcasting system might not have been so broken and boring. But if the spell system is really causing you that much grief, you can always just run past enemies. They'll never follow you, and for the most part, you never have to clear areas of enemies to move on. So more often than not, I just found myself bolting from enemies and running through the level. The only bonus you'll get from killing enemies is that Harry will level up, which increases spell power, though you'll never feel like your spells are getting any stronger. Enemies will also drop objects like the Elixir of Life and Strengthening Solution, among other things that will mostly heal Harry, though since Harry has regenerating health, these healing items are mostly pointless. The game also brings back the invisibility cloak. You'll have to use the cloak to avoid Death Eaters and to sneak around the environment. However, there's no penalty for getting caught in the stealth sections. If you do get caught, the game will throw a couple of enemies at you whom you'll easily put down, and then you can throw the cloak right back on as if nothing happened. Though eventually you'll find yourself choosing not even to use the cloak and just attacking enemies or run right past them. The game also attempts to allow players to stun enemies from behind while under the cloak, but you literally have to go right up a Death Eater's ass if you want to guarantee the stun, or the spell will miss and the Death Eaters will begin their attack on you. Another pointless addition to the game is the encounters that the game sends you on. At various points during the game, the narrative will pause and force you into 3 mini-challenges before allowing you to continue the story. The encounters have Harry leaving Ron and Hermione to help Muggleborns escape from Snatchers. Some of these encounters will happen at times that clearly conflict with the narrative. For example, while at Grimmauld Place, one of the encounters will have Harry inside of a cave trying to escape a Hungarian horntail. How Harry got there or why he's there is never explained. Another encounter has Harry sneaking around the Ministry of Magic trying to rescue Muggleborns, mere minutes after the scene where Harry just escaped from the Ministry with the Locket Horcrux. I mean, why would Harry go back to the Ministry of Magic after just escaping it? The encounters are just there to pad out the game's length, and this becomes painfully obvious when you realize that the game is about 3 hours long. These encounters would have been fine as challenges that you can select from the main menu, but inside the main narrative they just seem like a waste of time and a cheap way of extending the game's length. Another broken mechanic is the way you'll find your next objective. You can have Harry cast the 4-point spell to be guided to your goal. However, 4 points is completely unreliable. After casting the spell, you'll almost never be facing the right way to see which way the spell went, leading you to have to cast it again. And once you do find it, it will stop showing you the path after a few feet, leading you to have to cast the spell all over again. The biggest annoyance to this system is that once you've cast 4 points, the game will not allow you to cast it again until the first spell has disappeared. And even then it seems to be picky about when you're allowed to cast it again. The cover mechanic is also just as busted. Harry can stick to cover and then peer out to fire spells, but the camera is just too tight in the cover position, making it very claustrophobic, and it drastically narrows your field of view. Taking cover is not always necessary and frankly not even needed, so you might just find yourself taking cover during the early missions that explain to you how to do it. Even the collectibles that you'll be picking up are half-assed. You can find daily profits and the quibblers lying around, but rather than seeing the whole paper, you're given like a small paragraph to read inside the menu screens. And it's only a couple of sentences. And there's also symbols of the Deathly Hallows to go around and collect, but good luck finding them without a guide since I went through the entire game twice and I found none of them. The only good collectibles are the Potter Watch passwords, which have you listening to the Potter Watch show with new dialogue recorded by Fred and George actors James and Oliver Felt.
Pals of Potter. Our usual update on the friends of Harry Potter. We have heard within the last few hours that Rubeus Hagrid, well-known gamekeeper at Hogwarts School, has narrowly escaped.
The game's achievements weren't even done properly, as the difficulty achievements do not stack. You must play the game 3 times to get all of the difficulty achievements. And then there's the boss fights. The god-awful, spell-spamming boss fights. The game has you battling Umbridge in the courtrooms, trying to stun Nagini in Godric's Hollow, and a battle with the Locket Horcrux, and then finally a showdown with the Malfoys. The battle with Umbridge and Nagini are just normal stupefying spamming battles. There's no strategy and no real challenge. The fight against the Locket Horcrux is ridiculously challenging, and it borders on completely broken. You have to fire spells at snakes that emerge from the locket. The only problem is that the snakes spit out spells at you, and there are also spiders crawling around which can drain your health within seconds. I must have died at least 10 times, and this was on the easiest difficulty setting. And the only way to win this fight is to quickly start spamming Stupefy, while just moving back as far as possible to avoid all the spells and spiders. And the final battle with the Malfoys is just flat out broken. At this point I was so bored at randomly stunning enemies with Stupefy, I simply ran behind a column, never fired a spell, and you know what? I won. EA must have known how crappy the game they made was, because the game continues on even when you willingly don't attempt to play it. Even the presentation looks like a step backwards. Environments look okay for the most part, looking dark and gritty. However, character models look downright sloppy, and once again, EA can't seem to make the character model for Hermione look anywhere close to Emma Watson. Voice acting also takes a hit, as only Rupert Grint is on hand to voice his character. The rest of the cast does what they can, but it's almost as if they're trying really hard not to sound like the actors from the films. I mean, the Voldemort stand-in for Ralph Fiennes does alright, but the stand-in for Bellatrix is just downright terrible.
You dirty little monkey! How dare you take a witch's wand? How dare you defy your master!
The Xbox 360 version also has Kinect support, but thankfully I don't have a Kinect, so I can't say much about that mode, though considering that Kinect support was dropped for Hallows Part 2, I'm gonna guess it wasn't all that great. Simply put, Deathly Hallows Part 1 is a mess from start to finish. There's no fun to be had in the entire game, making it hard to recommend for fans, let alone anyone else. Most Potter games in the past have had their flaws, but there's always been some good to counterbalance the bad. Hallows Part 1 has no good to counter with, and so the game is easily the worst in the series. Thankfully, EA has one more chance to fix the Potter franchise and end this series on a high note. Can EA accomplish the task? Well, I mean, how bad could the next game really be?